Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of Fun on Foot. It is a series of virtual sightseeing tours in which I'll take you with me to beautiful and interesting places that I've found. So, are you game for a walk? Then come on, let's have some fun on foot.
What a strikingly handsome fellow that was. I'm sure he'd never be caught dead trying to pass off an old bedsheet as a backdrop for a video. Anyway, welcome everyone to Fun on Foot. My primary purpose with this series is to show you various aspects of Copenhagen for your enjoyment. The idea is to highlight and explore any place that I feel worthy of attention. I plan to cover locations all over the greater urban area and parts of the surrounding countryside as well. What I especially look forward to is to show you things of which you might not be aware, whether it be a beautiful park, some interesting architecture, a trail, or something else. Now, I have walked, run and bicycled literally thousands of kilometers in this city, and I still discover new things now and again. So there really isn't a lack of material. Hopefully, the series will be interesting even to those of you who have lived here your entire lives. Of course, I can't promise you that I will follow through with all those things until I have some idea of how popular this sort of program is. So, if you do enjoy this, please use some of the available tools to inform me of your opinion, such as the like button and the comment section, both of which can be found directly below here. Anyway, on to the program. So, I said that I would like to cover many of the less known parts of the city, but we shall start here in the center of town. That is because I want to give you a general idea of Copenhagen first, so you have something to relate to when I dive into obscure details later on. To achieve this, I have chosen to start this series with a walk along about half of the old city wall, because it was a very strong factor in the shaping of Copenhagen for almost 700 years. This place, right here, or shown here, is called Langebro, which means long bridge, and is one of several which spans the strait between Zealand and Amager, the two islands on which Copenhagen lies. So, how did it start? Well, long ago, just after the defeat of Sauron, in the middle of the 12th century, three pretenders were struggling to establish themselves as rulers of the then quite young kingdom of Denmark. In the end, in 1157, there emerged as winner a man called Valdemar the Great, and one of his staunchest supporters was his own foster brother Absalon, a priest. To repay him for his assistance, Valdemar helped Absalon become bishop in Roskilde, and also gave him a rather large amount of land about 30 kilometers to the east of that city. On those lands were a number of villages, one of which was called Havn, meaning harbour. 10 years later again, in 1167, Absalon fortified this village with a defensive wall and built himself a castle within, on what is to this day referred to as Castle Isle. In the history of Denmark, this act marks the foundation of Copenhagen. Now, obviously, people had been living here for some time before that, or there wouldn't have been a village. The oldest man-made structure that I've read of are some wooden caves from around the 8th century. And from what I read, there might even have been some fortifications present before Absalon made his. But his taking over the area has long been marked as the actual foundation of the city. I guess because it has a very nice official date attached to it, which can be verified in legal documents from the era. In Absalon's day, Copenhagen was of course much smaller, both in population and in actual land area. Over the centuries, the land on both sides of this strait has been significantly expanded, and a number of artificial islands have been added in the middle, with the effect that the coastline would no longer be at all recognizable to anyone of that time period, even if you removed all the modern buildings. However, those expansions didn't come until later, and the old coastline and the defensive wall, as shown on this map, would remain the outer limits of the town for several centuries yet. Now that we have a basic grasp of the early history of Copenhagen, let's turn our attention to some of the things that we can actually see here. The road we're following is H.C. Andersen's Boulevard, obviously named after the famous author Hans Christian Andersen. It is one of the busiest roads in Copenhagen, being the only larger road that goes straight through the city centre and crosses over to the adjacent island of Amager, which contains a large part of the city as well as the airport. Before the automotive revolution, this was indeed a splendid boulevard with trees, lawns and flower beds down the middle. Today's thundering motorway is decidedly less appealing in most ways, but at least the architecture along the sides there of those days still regales us with one of Copenhagen's finest big city impressions. Here, on our left, we come upon Glyptoteket, a famous museum. Most of you, regardless of nationality, probably have at least a passing familiarity with the beer brand of Carlsberg, which is a Danish brewery with origins in Copenhagen. The son of the founder, who came to be the head of the company after his father's death, was, to put it mildly, an avid art and antiques collector. He donated most of his collection to the Danish people to be displayed in this magnificent edifice. That was back in 1888, but the museum kept adding to the collection so that they now have over 10,000 items, many of which can be seen inside. The price of admission is, in my opinion, worth it for the Winter Garden alone. Very nice place. But apart from that, the collection consists mainly of ancient Mediterranean art and Danish and French art from the 19th and 20th century. Immediately adjacent to Glyptoteket is the famous Tivoli amusement park. It was established in the 1840s in front of the old defences. It is an amusement park much like any other, with rides, restaurants, shows and pretty scenery. As is common for such establishments around the globe, they make sure to decorate the premises to suit many of the holiday seasons, such as Christmas, Easter and Halloween. The fame of the place is, however, only one reason why I mention it. Although we can't see it very well from the street, but I film it a little bit later on, this marks the first place on our walk where we come across any visible remains of the old city fortification. The little pond inside the park is in fact a remainder of the old moat, which shape has been drawn in on this here map. As you can see, the outline really hasn't changed much since then, leaving a curious mark from a time when its main purpose was to keep foreigners out rather than attract them. In fact, in 1659, during the so-called Second Carl Gustaf War, the Swedish army mounted an assault on the Copenhagen defences in this very spot, but were repelled. Legend claims that the skeletons of slain Swedish soldiers still lie buried in the ground under Tivoli. Maybe their spirits watch over their descendants as we try to take over Copenhagen in our own, less overt manner. Shh! Don't tell the Danes. They don't know. On the other side of the boulevard lies Copenhagen City Hall, with its accompanying square. Since my father, who is a semi-retired professor in urban design at the University of Lund, my hometown, never ever shuts up about it, I suppose I had best mention that the hall and the square in front of it are made to vaguely resemble the city hall and square of the Italian town Siena. The chief elements taken from that place are the position of the tower relative to its facade and the slight bowl-like depression in the square. I don't have any pictures from Siena, although you can just Google and find them, but the place is a more cramped and dynamic version of this. Dynamic. With a deeper depression and a really tightly packed building facades around it. It is also home to a yearly horse racing festival, which is quite controversial as I understand it, where the various districts of the town are represented by one horse each in a race around the square. It is worth a visit if you're ever in the area. It's beautiful. But this city hall is also worth a visit. There is no entrance fee, so just traipse on in. And it has beautiful interiors. 2 or 3 levels you can access, I believe. Apart from offices, it also houses some city archives, which are open to the public, if you behave. There's a small popular wedding chapel, and also a shop where, among other things, you can buy honey that was made by bees who reside up on the roof of the building. Being composed of the nectar from flowers in the surrounding parks, this is nothing less than the true taste of Copenhagen. Oh dear, I should have had a jar of honey to show you. Here is one such jar of honey that I wanted to show you. It's very nice. I can warmly recommend it as a good souvenir from Copenhagen if you ever visit. The square in front of the hall is one of the busiest in the city on any given day. Tivoli and the central train station, along with several popular hotels, are to the west, and the main shopping street starts immediately to the east and winds attractively through the very core of historical Copenhagen. So this is the natural thoroughfare of nearly all tourists and many of the locals. In addition to that, the place is frequently home to cultural festivals as well as political manifestations. So there is nary a dull moment here. Hard to miss the large building site, which covers more than half of the square there, isn't it? It's been like that for well over 6 years now, due to the establishment of a new underground railway line, which is set to start running during summer 2019. It is a circular line and will extend the network to many of those areas of central Copenhagen that aren't officially serviced by the current system. I personally look forward to studying the effect those newly established stations will have on their surrounding areas, such as new businesses popping up, changing popular travel routes, and possibly geosocial structures, or some such term. I am in no way a particularly knowledgeable person regarding these things, but I enjoy observing them nonetheless. I actually find the whole endeavour and the subsequent planned public transport projects extremely interesting. But since they aren't the focus of this video, I won't go into detail about them. If this series is successful enough, however, you can count on me covering that subject in depth. This is also where the western gate to the city used to be, up until the old fortifications were decommissioned, starting in 1857. A fact that is remembered through a naming convention that concerns 3 train stations and 4 sections of the city. The local train station here is called Vesterport, meaning West Gate, and the district stretching out to the west from this place is called Vesterbro, meaning West Bridge. The bridge part of the name refers to the bridge you had to cross to get over the moat when travelling to that area from the city. The other two train stations are Nørreport and Østerport, meaning Northgate and Eastgate respectively. And there are the corresponding bridge districts as well. I will go into more detail about those things in a later video. Now we are gradually approaching the end of our walk and the video, but I have saved a treat for last. At the western corner of the old city wall we find its oldest visible part. It is the ruin called Jarmers Tårn, meaning Jarmers Tower, and it was built circa 1529 as part of an update of the previous defence. A century or so later, that wall was itself deemed outdated, and the tower was covered in dirt during the rearing of the modern ramparts. Those ramparts were maintained as active parts of the city defences, up until the aforementioned decommission started in the mid-19th century, and much of them remain to this day, as we shall see in the subsequent videos of the series. The tower was excavated in the 1880s and has stood here as a decorative and memorial ruin ever since, also giving name to the space around it, which is called Jarmers Plads. The tower's name refers to a Wendian prince from the North German island of Rügen. The Wends were a Slavic people who had spread throughout much of Europe by that time and could be found in several places. Though not actually living in Scandinavia, the Wends feature quite frequently in its history. Indeed, Bishop Absalom, whom I mentioned earlier as the founder of Copenhagen, famously divided his time between head of church and leader of Denmark's armies in a number of wars against them. Yes, he was a very fascinating individual, and I just might make a video about him someday. But back to the Wendian nobleman. This particular prince was named Jaromar, and he lived in the 13th century. He had gotten himself involved in Danish politics and sacked Copenhagen together with the Danish bishop Peter Bang in 1259, breaking through the defences at this very point. From what I can glean on the web, Jaromar, who was obviously called Jarmar by the Danes, seems to have been a very well-meaning person in youth, establishing monasteries as well as developing and protecting trade routes in his homeland of Rügen. But the later part of his life, he only lived to be 42, seems to have been spent in quite bloodthirsty campaigns of war throughout central and eastern Denmark, during which he allegedly committed several acts of cruelty. For example, it is said that he burnt much of Copenhagen during his invasion. His despicable ways finally caught up with him as he was stabbed to death by a vengeful woman only a year later on the island of Bornholm, which is in the eastern part of Denmark, or possibly in the mainland area of Skåne, which used to be Denmark but which is now Sweden. His attack on Copenhagen seems to have been a very memorable event, since it was thought of 270 years later when they built this tower. For the people of 1259 it was surely a tragic thing, and I'm very grateful that I wasn't here then, or any of the other times Copenhagen was invaded, sacked, burned or bombed, because its history isn't lacking in such events. But for us who live here during a peaceful time, this kind of story only serves to add some romance to a place, I think. And there are many more such places and events that I look forward to telling you about. And so, for now, I leave you here at the westernmost corner of the old city wall. As I calculated, the filmed material that I have should make about 4 more episodes to cover the rest of the walk, making this into a 5-part series. I hope you found it amusing and that you look forward to the upcoming installments. Until then, I am Niklas Björkerot, and I wish you merry meandering. Oh, there was one more thing. I'd like to inform you a bit about my various projects. I do not only make YouTube videos, but I have several other creative projects running as well. First and foremost, I'm a painter and a writer, and you can find out more about that by following the links below to either my website or my online shop. There you can, well, on the website you can see artworks such as this one in the various galleries, and photographs from exhibitions and fairs where I have participated. And you can read my novella. In the web shop you can buy tasteful attire such as this t-shirt, which features my art. Not only this one, there are several to choose from. Recently, apart from YouTube, I have also started dipping my toes, these are my fingers but they stand in for my toes at this moment, into fashion. I'm starting my own fashion brand, and computer games. Those projects aren't quite ripe to show yet, but they're on the way, especially the fashion brand. It shouldn't be too long until there's an official announcement with, pictures and stuff. At least before January. So, if you want news about my various projects without checking my webpage periodically, I suggest you follow me on Instagram, where I post pictures and information under the name Birklaus. There should also be a link to that down here, about my various creative efforts to keep you all up to date. If you really, really like what I do, I think you should go to the Patreon page I have, also linked down here, where you can support me financially, which you can find out more about down there. There are a few perks to doing that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this production and that you follow me in the future. Goodbye.